Hi, everybody. It is great to be here and to relive this highly exciting pinnacle moment for our chapter. In addition to being the state coordinator, I'm also the group leader for the Wilmington Newark chapter, which is located in Newcastle County. And we had in 2020 been pursuing an agenda of increasing our number of endorsements from community leaders, and that included elected officials. And so one of our chapter members had sent, I believe, an email saying, "Would you like to endorse?" And this highlights sort of the one of the key things that we would communicate to you guys today. One of our key lessons is to pick the right person to start with. So Dee was familiar to many of us in the environmental organizations in Delaware. She'd been a leader of several organizations, including Plastic Free Delaware and Delaware Sierra Club, and had recently joined the Newcastle County Council, which we were very excited about. So we reached out to her with an email, and she not only said, yes, she would love to endorse, but would we also like a resolution? And we hadn't even gotten that far ahead in our thinking. So we were just, oh my, yes, we would love to have a resolution. And so how should we do this? So that's when Jill was kind of looped me into the conversation. And we started with, how should we write this? And so it's very fortunate that CCL has a template resolution as a starting point. Plus, there are a number of other government bodies, local government bodies that have already passed resolutions that you can draw on. So, so I sent those as resources to Dee, and then I'll let her take it from there about how the resolution was developed.
Thanks, Beth and Edie. So, yeah, obviously I'm all about, all of us, elected or not, are too busy these days and have too much to do. So I'm all about not reinventing the wheel if we don't have to. So if there is a template, which you obviously have, that makes things so much easier. So my assistant and I, just took what was provided and put it into Newcastle County format, because every local government or state is, does things a little differently in terms of how they lay things out and the preamble and that sort of thing. So we turned it into Newcastle County format, and I mean, I have to say, looking back, Beth, I think we got kind of lucky maybe, but you never quite know how these things will go, and I figured it was worth trying. So and being, I had only been elected in November of 2018, so I'm still learning, but I was certainly willing to give it a try. So I guess, I have to commend Beth and all of her volunteers who just are so incredibly well organized. And then, so as soon as we had it ready, I guess, and got it on the agenda, Beth's team went to work behind the scenes getting, and I'll let you talk about that, Beth, but, getting letters into all of my colleagues and laying the groundwork for when it was actually going to appear on the agenda.
Right. So I think the timeline that we had was about 2 weeks notice from when it was appearing on the agenda. And there were 2 meetings at which it was going to be heard. One was an executive session in the afternoon, and the other was the meeting that same evening for a vote by the council. So we made plans for people to appear at both of those to give testimony. But prior to that, we also activated volunteers in a letter writing campaign using the tool Action Alert. So we had sort of pre-composed a letter in support briefly that people could customize by going to that tool and sending to all 13 council members with one submit button. And so that was sent out to our chapter mailing list. And we also have another group in Newcastle County that we activated, which was a CCL affiliated chapter at a school named St. Andrew's School, where there was a really active CCL volunteer who got this group started, and the students remain active to this day. And so they were not in school at the time. It was still summer break for them. And so they were really looking for something to do, and really contributed to that Action Alert campaign. So, I think maybe some of the council members were a bit surprised by the vigor of that mailing campaign. And we had, I would say, about a dozen people at the afternoon meeting, and maybe as many as 25 or so at the evening meeting, giving our testimony. And then the vote was taken. And because it was such a short timeline, we didn't do what I would recommend that you do if you have enough time, which is to kind of meet with each council person or, town council member, whatever level you're working on, to sort of gauge their concerns and their interests and so far ahead of time. But we sort of didn't know how the vote was going to turn out going in. I'll let Dee finish that off.
And when it's hard, the one-on-one meetings are of course really key if you can get them. It's obviously been hard these last 2 years to do that. But obviously, the hierarchy is one-on-one meetings, one-on-one phone calls, custom letters or faxes, and then, sort of the mass emails. But you do what you can, and any combination thereof is powerful. And I just want to say and that we probably don't want to take up too much more time, but once we got to the public meeting and the committee meeting and the council meeting, Beth had all of the speakers very well organized, so they were not repetitive. Everyone spoke, focused on one aspect of the bill. And also I noticed they were very responsive to the comments that my colleagues had said in discussion. So, in particular, as you might imagine, one of those was around jobs, and a couple people spoke to different aspects of the jobs issue very well. And I have to say, we have 13 council members, and so 7 votes wins the day, and we snuck by with 7 yays, but we didn't get any nays. There were 5 who voted present and 1 voted not voting. So I do think, even though we snuck it through with only the bare minimum, there probably would have been a lot more nays if it hadn't been for the amazing testimony of everyone that came, all the public comment that really nullified, the kind of the nay vote. But we got it done. So that was the important thing.
So that's great. So now we're going to ask Mayor Foster and Hope to talk about their process.
Thank you.
Hope you're on mute. Unmute, Hope.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah. This is a story from, 2018, 2019, so a little bit older in the sense that, I could still meet in person with the Chestertown Environmental Committee, and I did that as a kind of standard outreach that we do as group leaders, as one of the opportunities that we have in our communities to, educate folks first about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and then of course, to get the endorsements. So, at that first meeting in 2018, actually, the sustainable director of Washington College, we have a little college in our town, had brought a student, and that student was wonderfully intrigued by the opportunity and actually went back and got her fellow students to get the Washington College president to endorse. And so that was a wonderful win. But the actual environmental committee didn't act very quickly. They said to me, well, this is all fine and wonderful, but why don't you present in front of the mayor and council? And at the time, Mayor David Foster now was on the council, right? And he was also a member of the committee. So he'll be able to tell his perspective. But so I, of course, did go and present in front of the mayor and council with members of our chapter. And council member David Foster stood up and defended the idea, and that was great. We didn't get members from the environmental committee that day, though, and there was a little bit of question that the mayor had about endorsing a federal and advocating at the federal level. So at this point, Mayor Foster, would you like to take over a little bit? There's
Sure.
some back and forth because it was a whole year later that I came back. So
Absolutely, Hope.
Mhm.
First, I really want to commend Hope on her work in doing this. And I think going first to that environmental committee, going to the college, building support there was critical. And part of the reason that the environmental committee chose not to go ahead and endorse at that point is that they really saw their role as advisory. And yes, they would advise the mayor and council to do this, but they saw that as a decision for the mayor and council. And I think by going that route, that helped to build trust within the mayor and council. Hope also had a personal connection to some other council members. I think that where possible to do the one-on-one meetings, but I don't think we'd had a chance to reach out to each of them at that point. But I really see Hope's persistence throughout this process and painstakingly building trust with the council members. It was interesting at this time that, the mayor at that time was the one person who didn't take this on, not because he wasn't in favor of all reasonable actions we could take to avoid climate change, but because he didn't see that as a proper role for a small town to take on. That we don't normally take on federal issues or national issues. But the other council members saw that this was an opportunity. So we did go ahead with the resolution on that. And I think that was very important. But I really see that action as critical. I think the other thing that Hope had done in terms of the videos that she presented, and it was very well prepared, and they focused on the relevance to Chestertown. Yes, we can read in the papers about worldwide impact of that, but she was able to show videos of previous floods in Chestertown. People could recognize certain houses, streets, this sort of thing. They could really identify and project forward and say, what would happen to our community? Some of the most valuable resources, the impact on the community itself will occur with sea level rise. And so that was brought very close to home. So for me, the takeaway really was that building of trust, building of support with the individuals and with the respected organizations in town. And it actually hurts. I consider myself a bit of a policy wonk, but the expertise per se, I don't think played as much of a role as I would have anticipated. I can actually consider myself an expert on this, but people didn't ask me questions on that. Would this work? Wouldn't it work? Was it feasible? Was there a serious problem out there? And could this help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that kind of was the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to kind of continue the story for folks who, want to take this on, which is really important. And I encourage everybody to do this. It was a whole year later, right? In 2019, I think before COVID hit, or sort of around the time, because I had to actually do the actual vote for, they took the vote actually in virtually after COVID, but we had some flooding events, right? And so I was out in the park taking pictures of the flooding events, and there I met the present mayor at the time again. And I was like, look at this. And he was like, yeah, this is very concerning. And the town actually had already built up the part by our coast of our river 3 feet in order to deal with some flooding issues. But this event was showing that even the 3 feet rise that they had done was still causing, the electrical box was still very close to the flooding waters, and any storm surge that was going to bring it closer to that electrical box. So I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't gotten that resolution yet. Let me go back. The mayor maybe is going to vote for it now. I just had this conversation with him in the park. And so, I approached the environmental committee again, new people I had to kind of re-educate them about it and the new riverkeeper. And I had to push pretty hard, really, in order to get them to vote. And it was the other council members that I had developed very previously in-depth relationships with that came forward and voted. And the mayor at that time actually never did, as present Mayor Foster mentioned. So thanks.
Well, thank you. So it sounds like persistence and trust are like common themes that were involved in both of the processes in Maryland and in Delaware. And I imagine, the participants have questions for the panel. So we are going to go to Charlie and hear some of the questions that have come up. Hey, Charlie, what do you have for us?
Well, thank you, Edie. There have been a number of good things, good resources in the chat. People might want to look it over, but we did have a question from Peter Handler about how your proximity in Chestertown, being close to the Chesapeake Bay, may have influenced the decision or the thinking of people. Do you think that was a factor that was involved or not? Asked Peter.
I think that was a major factor, absolutely. We are attuned to that. We have been subject to some previous storms. But yes, people do pay attention. Prior to being mayor, I was a river keeper on the Chester River. And so we had connections with wide variety of people there. And so, yes, I think that made, in fact, that was one of the final arguments that Hope was able to make. If Chestertown doesn't support it, who should? If it wasn't important enough for a town so close to the Chesapeake Bay, a river town, to vote in support of this, then how could we possibly get other communities to do so? So I think it turned that argument on its head that the mayor had sought to mean, oh, this isn't, we don't deal with national issues. It kind of turned that argument around.
Right. So they're so important to take on leadership and to emphasize the power of leadership and the potential of leadership. And that's really, in 2017 was my first project in Kent County around our changing climate, of course, and the effects of heat trapping gases. And at that time, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation didn't even come out to discuss climate change. They were still not doing that. But finally this year, they have come forward and said, yeah, this is a really important issue we have to get behind. So that's just where we are as a country right now.
Okay.
Peter, did you want to follow up that question with your subsequent ask? Take yourself off mute, Peter. I think we could do that because there weren't a lot of other questions in the chat box. Peter, if you're still on mute, I could.
Okay. Yeah, that this is, I guess, also for Beth and Dee, but by extension, something that we've been working with in Philadelphia is we had an endorsement by City Council 6 years ago, and we're trying to get that done again because I don't think very many members of City Council now or on council then is looking at local issues, however climate might affect communities large or small, as a factor in reaching out to local political officials.
Making the connection to local issues, absolutely. That definitely was a big part, I think, in gaining support for ours and having people give examples, of things that they're aware of. And, it's not something that that all of the elected officials shouldn't know already, but probably not a bad idea to remind them and make it local. And because one of the biggest pushbacks that we got that day was, it's not our job to be telling the Congress and senators what to do down in Washington. Like that's not our lane. We were told to stay in our lane. But others, on the flip side, made the point that, we're all in this climate change boat together. And it's not about DC. It's about what's happening to us here in Newcastle County, not to mention everywhere around the world. And we're all part of that global community. And this is one small thing that's that we can do. It's really, it doesn't have any teeth in it. It's not regulatory. It's just symbolic, but it's a very small thing that we can do that says we're behind this. And the one other pushback we got was, well, this isn't the final bill. The bike bills, this was, I don't know, it's just a political thing, but they were saying that, oh, this isn't the final bill, it's likely to change. So how can I possibly vote on something that's not that might change? But it was also pointed out, you're voting on a concept, you're voting on just, we need to take action. So, I mean, that's what it is for me. And luckily for a majority of council that day.
That's an important issue too at this moment legislatively, where the EICDA is only in the House, is not expected to pass this Congress. All the focus is on what can we do with Build Back Better. And, it's possible carbon fee and dividend can be included in that still. So is it worth it to go to the trouble to get elected officials to endorse the EICDA at this point? And I would just say that it is important to point out that it's a concept. If they prefer, they could make an endorsement of simply carbon fee and dividend. But we have throughout the last year of Congress continued to bring on co-sponsors of the EICDA in the House. It has continued even in recent weeks to continue to attract co-sponsors. And, I don't think those members of the House would have done that if they didn't see that it was at least important symbolically. And so I think local elected officials could follow that example and say, well, if it doesn't pass this Congress in one shape or another, there's going to be another opportunity. The bill number might change, some particular details might change, but our endorsement of the concept will continue to live on.
Edie, we only had one other question from Rebecca St. John. We're about out of time, though. I think most of the comments have already addressed her concern about not having maybe a local impact quite as much. Do you want to wrap up the panel, Edie?
Great. Okay, so how much time do we have left? Are we already at 3:30?
Yes.
We have 5 minutes, I think. Still.
I think we have another 5 minutes, so we could take Rebecca's question.
Oh, well, my watch must be wrong. Her question was, since we didn't have we didn't have any rivers, we have some local flooding, any suggestions on how to get their city council to be more receptive or to support the federal bill? And that was sort of what we've been talking about here just recently. Any other thoughts on that topic?
Well, I know I mentioned, just weather related changes and storms, and the fact that we honestly don't have winter anymore, basically. And also the change in flora and fauna that's happening already in my lifetime. I mentioned that, so I mean, I think everyone can probably relate to that and have noticed that in their own lifetime. So, I don't think it's going to win the day maybe, but, hopefully with all the comments combined, you're going to win over enough votes to get support behind it.
Yeah. And I mean, if it's the power of your group, I don't know how powerful your group is, Rebecca, but, having folks next to you and having other institutions locally around you that understand it and that voice themselves and stand by you is very powerful. And, pointing out changes that might not be local, but are global, are dramatic, or, I mean, species. I mean, I'm seeing turtles and different kinds of birds because of the species changing. And so anything that you're noticing, is powerful and important.
Health impacts are another good, really universal one, from the associated air pollutants down to heat stress and spread of diseases like Lyme disease and things like that.
Right, bugs and different, yeah.
Mayor, do you have any additional comments?
I think that it does make sense to start first with communities that are at greatest risk. But unless somebody's living in a bomb shelter, we're all at risk. And we're all exposed to the changes that are taking place. But if you're trying to pick a community, if you're trying to build a groundswell for this, I think it does make sense to those communities that already recognize that they're at risk, build support there, and then move on to others. Some communities may be more progressive, more onto this, even though they're not at the water's edge, but they're just a little more environmentally aware. And so those are prime targets of opportunity as well.
Great.
One last thing, just kind of in defense of the 6 people in Newcastle who didn't vote for it, and the 1 person in Chestertown. Remember that the politicians usually have their hands full with all kinds of issues every day. And I'm not going to fault somebody for not wanting to take on another controversial issue. It takes time. It takes some bravery to do that. And you just gradually win people over. It's not that they're not interested. I know of people who were environmental educators, but didn't choose to support this.
That's true. He was an environmental educator.
Well, that might be a good segue. I thought I might mention, if the opportunity arrived too, which wasn't a lesson learned from this resolution process, but something I've learned along the way in my life and being an advocate, and maybe it's a good time of year to mention this, is Beth said earlier, be careful, make sure you select the right person, to approach to run your resolution. Of course, I think that's everyone probably understands that well, but it's easier to elect sympathetic candidates, elected officials, than it is to try to convince an elected official who isn't already on your side. So I would encourage all of you, to the extent you can, to get involved in your elections and get some progressives elected. If you have, I know county council might have 3 or 4 vacancies this coming year. And I'm really hoping, to get some new colleagues on that are more progressive than some of my colleagues who have literally been on council for decades. So we're 12 out of the 13 of us are Democrats. So it really has nothing to do with party, but we could use some more progressive thinking. And so anyway, just a lesson learned. It's easier to elect sympathetic officials than it is to change someone's mind. So get out there and work on campaigns and get some good candidates wherever you live.
Yeah, and just one thing for the conservatives, because we are in a very conservative county here, actually region here in the Eastern Shore, is also the conservative environmentalists, right? Going for those Republican conservative environmentalists, of which we do have many here. So.
Thank you. I want to thank our esteemed panel. So we are running now, getting close to running over, and I didn't want to interrupt the conversation, but thank you so much for your contributions. We've taken away that it takes persistence and relationships and understanding to move these types of resolutions forward. So we thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you everyone who attended the session. And we're going to set you free so you can move on to the next session. Again, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Feel free to get in touch if we can help in any way.